Good morning. Sam Tenpenny with Tri-State Livestock News, the Fence Post, and Farmers and Rangers Exchange, bringing you today's daily headlines concerning fair cattle markets. According to the Montana Department of Livestock, bovine tuberculosis has been confirmed in Blaine County. For the first time in decades, an infected cow at slaughter was identified by meat inspectors during routine inspection of a Minnesota processing plant. Once the infected animal was linked back to Blaine County, subsequent testing did reveal 3 additional TB-infected animals before the herd was placed under full quarantine. Finding bovine tuberculosis in Blaine County has triggered a full investigation to evaluate not only the extent of the disease, but to hopefully mitigate further spread. This effort does include the testing of adjacent herds and herds that have shipped animals either into or from that source herd. State veterinarian Marty Zalewski said, "We are working closely with the herd owner, the United States Department of Agriculture, tribal and wildlife officials on the next steps. The purpose of the investigation is to determine if other herds or wildlife are involved and, if possible, to determine the source of disease introduction." Tuberculosis does have an incubation period that can range from months to years, and infected animals do rarely show clinical signs, meaning cattle appearing healthy may actually be infected with the bacteria. Now, although tuberculosis is a zoonotic disease and capable of infecting people, it is not a food safety threat thanks to the robust meat inspection program and the pasteurization of milk for retail sale. According to Fox News, like other ranchers across the country, Nebraska's Rusty Kemp has grumbled for years about the prices paid for the cattle he raised, while the price of beef at the grocery store continues to climb. Pointing the finger at consolidation in the beef industry, Kemp and his neighbors have decided it is time to stop complaining and start competing. With federal data showing that for every dollar spent on food, the share that went to farmers and ranchers has dropped from 35 cents in the 1970s to 14 cents recently, leading Kemp to launch the audacious plan to raise more than $300 million with fellow ranchers to build a plant themselves. Crews will start work this fall building the sustainable beef plant on nearly 400 acres near North Platte, Nebraska, while other groups are making similar moves in Iowa, Idaho, and Wisconsin. The enterprises will test whether it's really possible to compete financially against an industry trend that has swept through American agriculture and that has played a role in the meat shortages during the coronavirus pandemic. The move is well timed, as the United States Department of Agriculture is now taking a number of steps to encourage a more diverse beef supply after the Biden administration stated their concern that the meatpacking industry was what they called pandemic profiteering. While many do support Kemp's efforts, including Texas Agriculture Commission Sid Miller, it's hard to overstate the challenge going up against huge, well-financed competitors that run highly efficient plants and can sell beef at prices that the smaller operators will struggle to match. The question is whether small plants can pay ranchers more and still make a profit themselves. David Briggs, the CEO of Sustainable Beef, acknowledged the difficulty, but did say cattle people are risk takers, and this is a risk they're ready to take. Consolidation of meatpacking started in the mid-1970s with buyouts of smaller companies, mergers, and a shift to much larger plants. Census data cited by the USDA shows that the number of livestock slaughter plants declined from 2,590 in 1977 to 1,387 in 1992, with big processors gradually dominating, going from handling 12% of cattle in 1977 to 65% in 1997. Currently, 4 companies, Cargill, JBS, Tyson Foods, and National Beef Packing, control over 80% of the beef market thanks to cattle slaughtered at 24 plants. That concentration became problematic when the coronavirus infected workers, slowing and even closing some of the massive plants, and a cyber attack last summer briefly forced the shutdown of JBS plants until the company paid an $11 million ransom. The Biden administration has largely blamed declining competition for the 14% increase in beef prices from December 2020 to August 2021. All the while, prices paid to ranchers have barely budged. Kemp and backers of similar plants have no intentions of replacing these giant slaughterhouses, but say they will have important advantages, including more modern equipment, and they hope less employee turnover thanks to slightly higher pay, benefits, and more favorable work schedules. Darrell Peel, an agricultural economist from Oklahoma State University, has noted that research does show that even a 30% reduction in a plant size will make it far less efficient, meaning higher cost to slaughter each individual animal. Now, unless these smaller plants can keep their expenses down, he has emphasized that they will need to find customers who will pay more for their beef, or they will have to manage with a lower profit margin than their much larger competitors. Federal legislation mandating that American consumers be accurately informed about where their beef and pork comes from was first passed by Congress back in 2005. According to the Great Falls Tribune, those country of origin labeling requirements were quickly faced with legal challenges from within the World Trade Organization as Mexico and Canada threatened to impose more than $1 million in tariffs against the United States unless labeling was removed. As a result of this pressure, in 2015, President Barack Obama signed a bill removing country of origin labeling requirements for these two commodities. The beef industry, both nationally and in Washington, has been divided over whether to bring these labels back ever since. In the 6 years that have followed since the repeal of country of origin labeling, Montana ranchers have weathered increasingly minuscule profit margins, while the big four multinational meatpacking companies have raked in record profits. On Friday, Montana Senator Jon Tester announced his support of a bipartisan Senate bill to reintroduce country of origin labeling regulations within the next few years. While speaking at the Montana Farmers Union office in Great Falls, Tester said this puts the American rancher who adheres to the strictest safety standards and protocols in the world on an even playing field and would ensure that beef raised in the United States is labeled product of the USA. Tester has long supported the reinstatement of country of origin labeling. He said he fully anticipates corporate packing interests will forcefully oppose the newly composed Senate bill on the grounds that it will impose unreasonably expensive demands upon packers to track and label the inflow of meat from multinational sources. Country of origin labeling is just one component of a larger menu of reforms that U.S. cattle producers are demanding of Congress. Groups like RCAF and the Montana Stock Growers Association are also pushing for legislation demanding greater transparency in how market cattle prices are set and stronger enforcement of the Packers and Stockyard Act that regulates trade practices within the meatpacking industry. According to the Western Livestock Journal, as an alternative to President Biden's 30 by 30 plan, the Senate and congressional Western caucuses have unveiled a report supporting a more holistic approach for locally led conservation, active land and water management, and multiple use. In a joint statement, Representative Dan Newhouse and Senator Steve Daines have called the recommendations in the Western Conservation Principles report real conservation outcomes for our lands and waters. They further stated that the report contrasts with the Biden administration's preservationist approach of locking up public lands to keep them untouched. The report states that while the Biden administration has since renamed the 30 by 30 plan to the America the Beautiful initiative, the issue remains ambiguous as to what is defined as conservation status and what percentage of lands and waters meets the 30%. The 10-year approach posed in the caucus report focuses on issues plaguing our lands and waters like invasive species, overgrown, disease, and infested forest, and post-wildfire restoration. To achieve these goals, the 10-year approach posed in the caucus report focuses on issues plaguing our lands and waters like invasive species, overgrown, disease, and infested forests, and post-wildfire restoration. To achieve these goals, the report proposes such things as streamlining the National Environmental Policy Act to increase active forest management, controlling, preventing, and eradicating harmful invasive species using recommendations from the Invasive Species Advisory Committee, offering title transfers to address the rehabilitation and maintenance of federal water infrastructure, and eliminating the DC knows best mentality and pursuing policies that encourage healthy landscapes with those whose livelihoods depend on them in mind. The report calls on a collaborative approach to maximize the conservation benefits provided by activities like grazing, hunting, logging, and mineral development through the expertise of local partnerships and existing shared stewardship authorities. Agricultural, mining, and logging organizations supported the report, while some environmental groups gave lukewarm support. Industry groups called the report a common sense approach to conservation in working landscapes. Chase Adams, American Sheep Industry Association Senior Policy and Information Director, supported the alternative plan, saying the common sense of recommendations provided a needed and beneficial framework for the President's 30 by 30 initiative and recognized the role of all stakeholders in preserving our nation's public lands through multiple use. According to the Western Ag Reporter, shortly after the deadline to reauthorize the livestock mandatory reporting program for 5 more years had came and went, albeit with a temporary extension, the subject, by no surprise, was one of the main topics of conversation in the fourth of recent congressional hearings regarding the state of the livestock industry. The first 2 panels included testimony from Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack and U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley. The final panel was made up of producer witnesses, including those from the cattle, hog, and sheep sectors, along with the processor. National Cattlemen's Beef Association Vice President Todd Wilkinson, a South Dakota cow-calf producer and feeder, kicked off the final segment of the hearing with his testimony in which he listed the 4 priorities of NCBA being price discovery, market transparency, processing capacity, and market oversight. These priorities guided the 2-hour panel discussion as U.S. representatives raised many questions about Congress's role in each issue. Wilkinson strongly urged Congress to resist a one-size-fits-all policy prescription, which may have disastrous unintended consequences, and emphasized that careful consideration must be given to the risk and reward of enacting market-influencing laws for hundreds of thousands of American ranchers and millions of consumers. He urged lawmakers to consider and adopt a multi-pronged approach to bring more transparency to the markets and resiliency to the supply chain. One avenue for more transparency that was discussed was regarding the reauthorization of the livestock mandatory reporting program. While all the producer panelists agreed that the most important step is ensuring that the program receives full funding again, some suggested improvements. On behalf of the National Farmers Union, 5th-generation farmer rancher and Oklahoma Farmers Union president Scott Blubaugh said that while the livestock mandatory reporting program is a critical tool for transparency in the marketplace, the act has not been updated to meet the modern market issues, as so much of the live cattle is now sold on a contract basis or marketing agreements, with very little sold on cash basis anymore. Blubaugh suggested that all marketing arrangements be reported the same as cash basis agreements, while Wilkinson agreed that the confidentiality rule does hinder LMR data. There was a general consensus that an advantageous change could be the creation of a cattle contract library. This is already implemented in the pork industry and aids in price discovery by providing a library of the types of contracts offered by packers to producers, including those purchased for future delivery. A conversation with much less consensus that could not be avoided was the topic of increasing negotiated trade. Blubaugh said his organization is in support of increasing negotiated trade, but that he didn't have the magic number as to just how much was needed. Legislation has been introduced by Senator John Grassley and Senator John Tester, which would mandate packers to purchase at least 50% of their weekly volume on the open market. Wilkinson said, while NCBA is concerned about the declining negotiated trade, they support a voluntary approach to remedy the program and express concern about government mandates. He suggested the bill intended to improve prices for cow-calf producers, and feeders may instead limit their options. Another avenue discussed to improve the markets and shift leverage is to create more competition at the packing level with more processing capacity. Many representatives questioned how USDA's funding to create and aid small and mid-sized processing facilities could be best utilized. Both Wilkinson and Blubaugh adamantly agreed that it is essential for the funding to go to regional packers and not members of the Big Four processors. Wilkinson said increasing capacity should deleverage the packers and take away the stranglehold that they have on the market. A representative of the North American Meat Institute highlighted additional concerns, stating that as a processor, startup costs are a major burden. Lately, labor shortages are a large obstacle, and that cattle supply for new packing facilities could become a concern. Along those lines, Wilkinson suggested that USDA funding isn't needed just to get small and medium facilities built, but also to cover the operating capital and the ability to guarantee loans. Blubaugh underscored the severity of the consolidated meatpacking sector by sharing the recent examples in which the market was severely disrupted by just a single plant going offline. Until next time, I'm Sam Tenpenny, and this is your Fair Cattle Markets Update.